Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Lunch was good? Anybody make a new friend? Meet some new folks? That's great. Very good. Great. Well, welcome back for this afternoon's program. I think we talked about it. We had an enjoyable morning, very informative. And now we've got maybe one of the best panels assembled anywhere in New York City today.
Wow.
I think that's what we're saying.
At this time.
At this particular time, at Nasdaq. But no, I think maybe anywhere, because it's really going to bring some great thoughts and insights together around balancing act of navigating AI and long-term business strategy. So we heard a lot about different plays out there. Now we're going to kind of get a perspective of how does that all work together with an outstanding panel. And I'll introduce them. I think we'll go in order from my left, your right. That's Chris Wellise. Chris is with Equinix. That's not the gym, but these are big data service provider. He's vice president of sustainability and great insights that he can provide on the infrastructure challenges that we're going to be facing here. Next up is Navishka Pandit, who is the engagement expert at EOS at Federated Hermes Limited. So that's an investor perspective now, thinking about the space and how companies and how investors are looking at it. So we welcome Navishka. Then Lyndon Park, who I've known for quite a while, who's the managing partner at ICR, who talks about advisory and shareholder activism. So how are shareholders thinking about these challenges and issues that are really out there, and proxy votes and all the rest that he's been very involved. We've worked together on a number of areas. And leading the way here is Nelson Griggs, who is the president here at Nasdaq. So let's give this group a round of applause. And special kudos to Nelson and the team just for hosting us here for what's been a really productive morning. So don't mess it up, guys. Let's go.
Oh boy, pressure's on. Pressure's on. Yeah, we're going to mix it up and do an AI panel. We thought we'd do something different. That was my joke to start. Oh well, I got a lot of work to do. All right, so we're thrilled to be here today. I think that the title really says it all. For those of you who are involved in managing a business or on boards or however you are, AI is certainly the topic of the day. And I think there's just these massive competing demands about how to move very fast, but also do it the right way, and thinking about the governance around that, and certainly all the stakeholders that are involved in this, from the board to employees to our customers to shareholders. It's probably one of the more complex topics that I've ever dealt with. I've been at Nasdaq for the last 24 years. Have been on on the C-suite area for the last 10, and this is a tough one. So this panel is going to really tackle this issue. They promise to solve all of our questions in 30 minutes on AI, and that's another joke. This is a tough one. I'm trying to, after lunch, trying to get the audience going here a little bit. Anyway, so we're thrilled to have this amazing team, because we're really covering, I think, the whole value chain when we think about infrastructure, moving on to the investor point of view, and then thinking about activism and certainly the advisory area. This panel is going to bring some amazing expertise to the discussion. So real quick chat on how Nasdaq thinks about AI. So we are a very cloud-first company. We've been all cloud except for the core trade engines at Nasdaq for the last 10 years. And so we're very advanced in AI, not maybe bleeding edge, but on the leading edge. And we've been at it for a couple years now, and we really think about it in two ways. One is all of our opportunities on the business, and those tend to be cost-related and opportunities to gain more efficiencies, and then in the product and how we do a better job for our clients. And we've had a governance framework at Nasdaq for the last 2 years, and it's changed 3 times, all with the idea we started very aggressive in how we control things, to then how we learn and how we think about giving the businesses more power to move more quickly. But it is difficult, and we report to our board every our 8 board meetings are always have an AI topic. So again, this is I'm excited to learn a lot from this group as well too. So let's kick things off, and we're gonna the first question is going to be a quick one. We want to just get one answer. The most critical challenge companies must face to get their AI initiatives right, and how they think about the long-term sustainable value. So an easy one, but if you can give us a quick start, we'll go with Chris. We'll go down the line here, and if you can just think through, like, if you had one thing that pops out to you to think about marrying the short-term demands, long-term effectiveness, what do you think about?
Sure, Nelson, thanks. From an infrastructure perspective, I would say that word would be scalability. And what I mean by scalability is an enterprise needs to develop its AI systems in a way that it can handle fast growth, increased volumes of workloads, complexity of data, without compromising reliability, performance, security, or sustainability. More than one word, but.
Got it, great.
From our perspective, we advise on proxy voting recommendations and engage on the behalf of over 70 institutional investors worldwide and have 2.1 trillion of assets under advice. Now, from our perspective, I think the most critical thing is to just have a robust governance and oversight structure that considers the climate-related implications of widespread AI deployment.
I guess from my perspective, I guess I was a former lead analyst at BlackRock and oversaw Nasdaq as well. Now advise boards on activism defense as well as kind of routine oversight responsibilities. Nelson, I think boiling it down to one thing. I mean, obviously it's going to be difficult, but I think the best companies that I oversee, advise on, they do one thing right, which is that people think about governance and oversight as kind of top-down activity, but the best companies do it from bottom up and top-down simultaneously very well, and hope to get into kind of what I mean by that a little bit later.
Yeah, everyone gets a chance to expand on this too, but so scalability, the framework, or making sure that framework is going to be top-down and bottoms-up seem like the real good way to approach that. So if we move into really thinking about implementation and infrastructure, you can kind of continue on your last point a bit. Chris, with the data centers and all the operations behind them, the increased need for power, cooling, so you talk about the scalability. How is Equinix thinking about all those workloads and meeting the sustainability requirements that are going to be that are really upon us?
Yeah, and I don't think you mind, Nelson, if I say that Nasdaq's a significant customer of ours too, right?
Yes.
So as they consider scaling sort of their workloads, we're partnering with them to do that. It's a tough one. I think you had mentioned you've seen a really unique inflection point in your career. I have to say the same for me in that, I've never seen sort of this perfect storm for the demand for green electrons since I've been doing this in 25 plus years. You've got repatriation of production in places like the United States, double the investment in production in the last 2 years. You've got electrification of everything. Climate-related goals, which in my view aren't going away, particularly at the company level. And I think AI, even though it does represent significant increase in demand, might just be the catalyst that we're looking for to really drive further decarbonization globally.
Want to make a quick follow-up on that with the current change in administration?
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the things, we hear a lot about data centers being energy hogs,
Yeah.
but I think you're going to probably see a shift of data centers moving from energy hogs to grid assets. A lot of the work that we do, so the classic sort of initiatives around energy efficiency, driving down what's called power usage effectiveness. That's kind of the data center metric for how well you're performing from an efficiency perspective. Improving efficiency, looking at things like full life cycle management. Anyone watch the Olympics? So the aquatic center in Paris, France was actually heated by an Equinix data center. So one of the things that we can do is actually recover the heat. We produce a lot of heat in those data centers, use those. We heat tens of thousands of homes in places like Helsinki, Finland. So efficiency, thinking of the full life cycle, moving from energy hog to energy asset through things like on-site energy production. And then, of course, a very robust renewable energy strategy. I think if you combine sort of those elements, that will help us sort of push through some of the issues that we're seeing, at least in terms of the demand shock related to AI.
Okay, and last question there, if you think about coming more from corporates pushing that or regulation, if you had to pick one or two, which will be the driving?
I mean, I would say both.
Okay.
I mean, if we've got customers all over the world, we're in 33 countries. In Europe, you've got a lot of top-down, slow-moving, very comprehensive regulation. But if you're a multinational in the US and you've got customers everywhere, they are demanding highly efficient, very sustainable data centers. And I've even seen, RFPs come in where they're weighting sustainability on par with cost.
Okay, great. Let's revisit your thoughts on framework and the institutional investors and how you think about that implementation and risk mitigation if you were trying to balance the investor point of view with how corporates actually implement that. Maybe some thoughts there.
So I think, to be able to balance both the opportunities and risks, you want to be thinking about how you give out director voting recommendations within a stewardship house. And then all of the companies these days, a lot of the listed ones have shareholder proposals that we're voting on. And so how are we recommending votes for directors and shareholder proposals? At the big tech companies, we've seen a stark increase in the number of AI-related shareholder proposals. This proxy season, I myself was stuck with a lot of late nights evaluating artificial intelligence-related governance. And touching upon, Lyndon, what you brought up, you don't definitely want it to be just top-down governance. The best governance is when it's not in a silo, when you don't have just one policy team that's decided it all, but it's integrated into the day-to-day operations of a company.
Easier said than done. A lot of work there to happen.
Yes.
So that's the point of the institutional, it's called the mainstream institutional investor. Now, Lyndon, think about the activist investor and how they might be viewing AI today, opportunity, risk, the whole landscape.
Yeah, I sometimes crack a joke that activist investors are like functional alcoholics, in that
Another joke. You guys aren't laughing at the jokes up here. That was good.
In that they're very smart and intelligent. They approach an issue from a very 30,000-foot view that companies don't sometimes know how to do.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, are they really sober? That's the question. No laughter here. Tough audience.
We're trying.
Yeah. So I think activist investors, when they boil down, when they look at an AI issue, I would say by and large, a lot of the sort of ethics guidelines and all these sort of considerations on human capital management, it kind of disappears. These guys like to criticize, especially in recent years, kind of margins and efficiency and profitability rather than M&A driven, because the refinancing environment was very tough, and we expect that to change somewhat. A good example is, Jeff Smith at Starboard. I dealt with him, advised the Bloomin' Brands on that situation. But, he also, around the same time, came into Salesforce criticizing their financial performance. At 13D Monitor conference this year, he made a long presentation on how it could even improve in terms of delivering revenue growth with more profitability and efficiency, and called out Agentforce AI, as kind of a way to automate a lot of customer support processes to deliver further growth, with more efficiency. I think we will see more trends like that in terms of activist investors, because now we're seeing kind of more of the activists take on not just margins and bottom line, but also top line performance as an issue. Exactly at Salesforce, that's what Jeff Smith kind of attacked. He called it Rule 50, and those of you that don't know, in the tech industry, that's essentially, if you add up the revenue growth and kind of the profit margins, it should be at least 50%, right? It's very, again, functional alcoholic way of thinking about the business. There are other spokes, but a lot of active investors will look for not only bottom line, but top line as well, and look for companies to do both very well. And I think AI, for a lot of tech companies, as well as some of the larger cap companies, they should really think about how to articulate this in the marketplace through earnings, through investor engagements, and really articulate what the value proposition is before Jeff Smith of the world get there.
Yeah, I go to our investor meetings often, and 10 questions so far, it's every one of what are you going to achieve with AI versus how you're managing risk. So investors are very, very focused on using it to accelerate the performance of a company. So when you think about that, let's revisit your thoughts on the communication, the framework. If you had to think through maybe just the top couple things, we articulate the framework, what would you lean into?
So just before I dive into the framework, something that I do want to share on the note of trends is that we've talked a little bit about, in today's conference, about the incoming administration. Something I do want to point out is that my crystal ball isn't as good as, or is as good as yours, but we do think that AI is here to stay. And so shareholder proposals on it, activism related to it is going to remain. And so when we come on to frameworks, so EOS has actually in 2018 published its artificial intelligence and data governance framework. So if a company is starting out, I would actually point them to that, and it's available in the Hoover app today. And we've been updating that. So we have a 2024 iteration coming out this December that encompasses some of the more emerging topics in the area. Something else that I would point to is the NIST AI risk framework, as they have some very good starting points when a company is just looking to build out its approach.
Well, that's great. That sounds tremendously helpful. So I want to go to that. So that's just, you go to the website, it's the whole framework's there. Excellent. Well, that's great. So Lyndon, moving back from your perspective in terms of the board, because we all want to have our board informed, but we also, want to make sure they're being the board and not the management team. How do you think about board structures you've seen successfully set up so they have the right level of information and asking the hard questions, but also leaving management to do their jobs?
Yeah, I think that latter part that you touched on is the most important part, Nelson. Right? Even when I was at BlackRock at Dimensional, engaging with companies like Nasdaq, we were specific in saying, this is analogous to what happened with cybersecurity years ago. People were trying to think about, do we add a cyber expert on the board? Investors generally prefer board members who can think about corporate strategy and add value through their skill sets and expertise rather than have a single issue director, right? But you do have to kind of think about what is the role of a director at the end of the day, and Navishka would probably agree, they are primarily fiduciaries to the company and shareholders. And what does that mean, right? And you said asking tough questions. I don't think, beyond sort of overseeing sort of the, and this is what I mentioned, by top to bottom and bottoms up approach, they should not be responsible for, devising frameworks to oversee AI in kind of granular manner. That's, for the best companies like Microsoft, and I have a client in Uber who really lean on AI and machine learning in a new way. Look, and you need to lean on the company's operations and sort of CTO and those people under him and her to really devise kind of a matrix of set of opportunities and risks, right? We're entering an era where it's not just predictive AI, but it's generative AI. There is kind of a risk value proposition where there's a commensurately higher risk potentially on certain areas of the business that you have to manage, but opportunity set is much higher too. Board members should not be advising on this day to day, in my view. They should, but in my view, these companies I just mentioned, Uber, Microsoft, they have committees like at Microsoft, they have an ESG committee that oversees it. For companies that don't have kind of bespoke ESG committees, a really good way, I think Navishka mentioned a really good thing, NIST framework, usually audit committee oversees that, as part of their mandate to oversee cybersecurity. Why not just broadly roll that up into kind of COSA framework to see kind of enterprise-wide risk management framework, right? Okay. I think that's what shareholders are looking for, and that they have kind of, the right information and presentation by which they can oversee and demand accountability on these issues. But I think day-to-day issues, they should by rights leave that up to company professionals.
Okay, that's very helpful. And Chris, for thinking about the one risk key item is data security, privacy. From Equinix's standpoint, are there changes you're making to think about how to implement that into your operations, but also educate companies on how you participate in helping mitigate that risk?
Yeah, well, security is obviously a really important element of all of this, and was even before AI. Sure. So security is a core part of our business and continues to evolve over time. Some of the most low-tech sort of approaches to security are often the best. Like, for instance, one of the things we implement is biometrics and making sure that the wrong people aren't getting into the cages of our customers or into the data center physical buildings themselves. That's pretty straightforward, right? Things like, obviously firewalls, encryption, DDoS mitigation strategies, where you've got attacks on the network and so on. But I think probably one of the most interesting aspects to security and an evolution, and one of the bets that we're placing, is around private AI. And so it's a kind of a core part of our business offering now. We've partnered with NVIDIA to offer private AI, DGX, pods within our data center environment with reference use cases that customers can use. Obviously, one of the core things that they need in order to implement a good, robust AI strategy is they need access to these GPUs that are fueling all of these computations that are occurring, and the references and the machine learning and so on that's necessary. And so private AI is interesting because it allows for close proximity. It allows for secure privacy related to the on-prem data that customers use, want, and don't want to be leaking into public models, for instance. It allows for federated training of models and other things that are helping them to meet their AI strategy. Similar to how cloud went hybrid, we're seeing that same thing occur within the AI environment, where you're seeing a multi-hybrid AI strategy with private AI being a core component of that.
In your client base, clients leveraging private AI now, is that something like a product in market? Is it half the clients, or I mean, it seems to be almost like a no-brainer.
It's accelerating.
Yeah.
We offer it in a number of our international business exchanges. We've got a couple of core clients that we're working with now, and we expect it to begin to rapidly grow as part of the business. But it's becoming a core part of the enterprise AI strategy, where they recognize we've got very proprietary data. We want to limit and prevent leakage from a security perspective. We also want to reduce latency, and so private AI is becoming a core part of that strategy. And then they've got access to public cloud as well, and so they're using the on-ramps at a place like Equinix to use the public cloud for AI where necessary and needed.
Wow. Are we using it?
We'll talk about that after.
All right. So let's move on into communication a bit. So Lyndon, kind of putting back to all your comments, if you're advising a company on how to communicate your governance framework to shareholders that builds trust, what are your recommendations in just practical sense? How do you suggest we all be doing that?
Yeah, I think the best time to be engaging with shareholders is now, before they get busy with proxy season in the springtime. And I think many of the company representatives in the audience likely are engaging with their important shareholders around the issues. That's because it is too late when Jeff Smith's knocking on the door of the proxy season, proxy fight, and you have to kind of grovel for support. That is not a good look. I recommend the sunny day conversation. So get an independent director. It doesn't have to be, and I always tell them, it doesn't have to be the most it doesn't have to be a cyber expert on your board. It needs to be somebody who can speak with the investors with a kind of openness of heart and grace and some good bedside manners, who can actually talk about these issues cogently, because they are actually involved in the process. And I would recommend setting an agenda, before reaching out to the investors, saying, in this season, we want to think about some of these issues, like AI governance framework. We want to get your feedback, within the framework of, we want to explain to you and give you an update on our long-term, strategy to build value, right? And AI is a part of it. And when investors see that, they will welcome their conversation from directors. And this is really the time to reach out to the shareholders through one-on-one conversation to articulate what you're doing and get the feedback, because they're talking to all the companies out there, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. Navishka, you had mentioned you have this framework you're publicly putting out there. If you think about, as you look at companies that you evaluate, maybe just on a percentage basis, how many companies do you think are actually getting the fact that it needs to be a robust communication to shareholders? Are we in the first couple innings of this, or do you see more companies saying, yes, this is kind of the board, this has to happen now?
So I think that everybody is jumping very fast on the AI train. And then the governance and the responsible AI approach is just being retrofit. And that's not how it needs to happen. we have a few leaders, and a lot of them are in the tech industry, that are thinking about this as they develop. Within just the Magnificent Seven, you have two companies that built out their responsible approach as they built out their AI deployment. And that speaks to, what we were talking about, Lyndon, about just having that at the center and not that top-down approach, but having everybody in the company know what they need to follow as they're deploying AI. And just to be able to gauge this, we like to speak to directors to understand. They don't necessarily have to have the expertise, as you said, but how are they challenging management decisions? How are they challenging management decisions on capital allocation for artificial intelligence?
Wow, okay. A lot to digest there, but you can see, I'm sure you see a wide range.
Yes.
And then do you see a path where it'll be easier for companies to find the best practices based on the size of company they are, the sector they are? Are we merging with some specific frameworks based on the company as opposed to an overall? Because it's Apple, it's hard. We always say at Nasdaq we have from Apple on down to the microcap. So there's a range there.
So definitely, because what we're starting to see is no company likes to be the last in the pack to follow. They might not be the first in the pack, but they ideally want to be a close follower of the leader. And so the leaders have come out in every industry, in financial services, in tech, in healthcare, and now we have a lot of companies that are moving much faster. And you asked about, sector-specific approaches. So we have, there's this Evident AI Index that came out 2 years ago that just ranks the financial service institutions on their approach to AI. And one big pillar is transparency. Then there's one on fairness. And so that index also publicly ranking these companies are really getting them to move.
Okay, great. So moving on to Christopher, when you think about this, going back to the beginning, you said a lot of demand has moved fast as a company, but we also want to think long-term about sustainability. When your team meets with customers, how do you see them balancing that? Not that they're in conflict, and I'm sure it's different across the world, whether you're in Europe, US, or regulations, but just that balance of saying, I have to move fast in the business, I want to get the production of AI, but then also thinking about the sustainability side of it. That's a tough balance.
Yeah, I mean, it is integrated. I mean, you mentioned earlier, Nelson, it's super complex and not one of the easiest things to do, but really sort of breaking down the silos and making sure that you've got cross-functional engagement across the teams is really critical. And there's probably like a handful of kind of core elements as I kind of think through how do you really develop the right scalable strategies in our enterprise. One is really around data management, preparing for the velocity, the variety, and the volume of data that's going to come at you. The second is really around network connectivity, making sure that you've got secure, very broad bandwidth connectivity as you're drawing upon data sources from the core, other data centers, public resources, or the edge, customers for enterprises out at the edge. The third is really around security, which we sort of touched on. The fourth is, agility, making sure that your systems are able to scale quickly for these shocks that might occur, think pandemic or whatever it might be for your particular business. And so those are all kind of core elements. And then security, as I mentioned, is the last one that we really kind of touched on. But then balancing all those in a sustainable way. I mean, when we talk about sustainability, it's interesting. I was looking up some quick notes that I had made on just impacts associated with AI, and was looking at my San Pellegrino. So it's 250 milliliters. If you use ChatGPT-3 to generate a 100-word email, it's 2 of these. So that's pretty remarkable, right? So customers are asking, how do we balance and think about our sustainability strategy while at the same time we're trying to implement an integrated AI strategy? And I think working with the right partners is really important. We get very detailed, it's really interesting. I'd love to talk to these folks after. I am shocked. I've been in sustainability. I'm an environmental scientist. I am shocked at the level of questions we are getting from investors. These are like PhD level sustainability engineer questions that are coming in to us related to what type of energy we're using, how the electrons flow through the data center, what are water reduction strategies, and so on. So, I mean, it's a balance, but I say it's all going to be achieved through partnerships and breaking down functions and having a robust sustainability strategy that connects to your AI strategy.
Simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're all coming on our year-end planning, or planning for next year, really, and thinking about, we'll go down the line here. We have just a few minutes left. You all have 30 seconds or so to think about. If you're in front of a CEO or a board, you shared a lot today, but if you had to boil it down to your best, one piece of advice to a CEO as they think about AI in your direct area, what would you be coaching them on to really put their team on?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see all too often is it's the fancy new shiny tool, and people are just trying to figure out how to play with it on the periphery. Yeah. I would say, enterprises need to integrate it into their core business goals, hire the right talent, create the right partnerships, and then, go at it in sort of a holistic way.
So those three things.
I think Nelson, you're like, you really like us to distill things down.
No, it's a possible question.
You're really forcing me to think in terms of sound.
No, I love it. No, but it is what it is. The integration, the talent, it is all kind of one thing.
Yeah.
Is how do you move that agenda forward? So
of course, executing's that's
that little execution piece.
Is.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Go ahead.
Data. Where do you get your data from? Where is it going? And what population subsections are not represented in the data, which are underrepresented, and which are overrepresented?
Wow. That was great. I wasn't ready. So efficient. All right, Lyndon, bring us home.
Yeah, I can't do better than that. But for
you have 23 seconds to try.
Yeah. Well, for CEOs and board members, I encourage you all to think about AI as a human capital management issue, right? Over 60% of 10Ks in S&P 500 identified AI as a risk factor, while less than 10% of them actually use AI as business, right? If you look at, we talked about shareholder proposals, aside from the big, tech companies like Chipotle, Ryder Systems, they received AI shareholder proposals, really kind of focused on what is the impact on human rights and human capital. This is something that is, fundamental to every business leader because, the people are the valuable assets. So how does AI impact them? I think there's a big homework remaining for a lot of companies out there.
Okay. So I think that was a ton of amazing information there. I saw a lot of people taking notes out there, which is awesome. The only thing, I think you all hit on this a little bit, but the only thing I'll kind of add on a conclusion that our board pushes a lot on is, do we know how to calculate the return on the investment? It is not free to do AI, and you think about how we spend time on the long term, are the investments going to pay off? Because there's a lot of upfront costs, and are you going to commit to either the cost takeout, or does that widget in the product really make it that much more sellable? Those are things I think we're all faced with from a business perspective, and reporting to the board is, do we spend our money the right way? But hopefully you learned something today. Maybe give a big round of applause for the panelists here. I thought they did a really great job. And we will work on our jokes for next time so we don't have to ask for laughs. But thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it.